My name is Renata Voss. I was 35 when I finally understood what my family actually thought of me. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of Sunday that smelled like rosemary chicken and felt, for the first 90 minutes, completely ordinary. My mother's dining room had the same yellow light it always had, the same chipped gravy boat shaped like a swan, the same laughter that rose and fell like a tide I'd learned to swim in a long time ago. I hadn't planned on saying anything that night. I never did. I had spent 15 years being the daughter who nodded, who refilled water glasses, who changed the subject when things got sharp. I was good at it. Maybe too good. My sister, Priya, sat across from me with her husband's hand resting on her shoulder like a trophy he'd won at a fair. She had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at me, a smile reserved for family gatherings, sharpened just enough to cut without leaving a visible mark. "So, Ren," she said, swirling her wine. "Any updates? Or are we still just, 35 and holding?" The table laughed. Not cruelly, not all at once, just a ripple, the kind of laugh people give when they've already decided something about you and are relieved someone said it out loud. And then my mother laughed too. That was the part that stayed with me. Not Priya's comment. I'd heard variations of it for a decade. It was my mother's laugh, quick and easy, unthinking, the kind of laugh you only give around people you're comfortable being unkind in front of. I looked at my plate. The chicken had gone cold at the edges. I thought about all the years I had spent making myself smaller at this table, so no one else would have to feel big. I thought about the folder sitting in my car. I hadn't brought it to use it. I want to be honest about that, even now. I had brought it because my accountant told me to bring physical copies to family gatherings this month, in case anyone had questions about the property transfer. I hadn't planned to open it here. I hadn't planned to say anything at all. But something in my mother's laugh, so light, so careless, settled into my chest like a stone dropped into still water. And I felt the ripples move outward, through every memory I had of being the version of myself no one at this table had ever bothered to actually see. "Run," my mother said, noticing my silence. "Oh, don't sulk. We're only teasing." "I know," I said quietly. "You always are." Priya's husband chuckled into his glass. My father, 3 seats down, kept eating like the weather hadn't changed at all. I set down my fork. "Actually," I said, "I do have an update." The table went quiet in that particular way tables go quiet when someone who is usually silent decides not to be. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that too. There was no shouting, no dramatic scrape of a chair. I simply reached for my bag, pulled out the folder, and set it gently on the tablecloth between the gravy boat and the wine bottle. "I closed on the Hollis Street building last week," I said. "The one Dad always wanted to buy back in the 90s. I bought it outright. No mortgage." Nobody spoke. "I've been working on it for 3 years," I continued, quietly, because I didn't think anyone here was particularly interested in what I actually do when I'm not being 35 and single at your dinner table. My mother's laugh from a moment ago still hung in the air, thin and brittle now, like something that had been said before anyone knew what it would cost. I want to go back, for a moment, to explain how I got to that folder, because the story isn't really about the building. It never was. I grew up the second daughter in a house that only had room, emotionally, for one. Priya was born first, and with her came a kind of unspoken agreement in our family. She would be the one people asked about. My mother's friends would inquire about Priya's grades, Priya's wedding, Priya's promotions, and my mother would light up like a switch had been flipped. When they asked about me, my mother's answer was always some version of, "Oh, Renata's fine. She keeps to herself." I did keep to myself. I'm not sure I had much choice. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being loved in a distracted way, enough that you can't quite call it neglect, not enough that you ever feel chosen. I studied structural engineering because I liked the certainty of it. A beam either holds the load or it doesn't. There's no ambiguity, no version of a beam that almost supports the weight, but doesn't quite, depending on how you look at it. I liked that. I think somewhere in my 20s I started applying the same logic to people, quietly testing who could hold weight and who couldn't. My mother could not. I learned that early. She loved easily and shallowly, The way you love a song you like well enough to hum, but not enough to learn all the words. Priya, for her part, had learned exactly how to be the daughter our mother wanted, and I don't think it was malicious, not entirely. I think Priya believed, the way people believe things they've never had to question, that this was simply how families worked. Someone shines, someone else holds the flashlight. I held the flashlight for a long time. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself work would matter instead, and it did, in the way that work matters to people who've stopped expecting anything else to. By the time I was 29, I had my engineering license and a small but steady consulting practice. By 31, I had bought my first small property. Nothing dramatic, a duplex 2 towns over that I fixed up on weekends because manual labor was the only thing that quieted my mind. I never told my family about any of it. Not because I was hiding something shameful, but because I had learned painfully that sharing good news with people who don't see you clearly is its own kind of exposure. I didn't want my accomplishments filtered through my mother's distracted approval or Priya's practiced comparison. So I built quietly. Property by property. Client by client. A version of a life my family had no part in, because they had never asked to be part of it. The Hollis Street building was different, though. My father used to drive past it when I was a child, always saying the same thing. Someday, if I ever had the money, I'd buy that building back. It had belonged to my grandfather once, before a bad decade forced the family to sell it. My father talked about it the way some men talk about an old love, wistfully, as though naming the loss often enough might someday undo it. I don't know exactly when the idea took root in me, buying it back, quietly, without telling anyone, and deciding for myself what to do with that fact. Maybe it started as a tribute to my father. Maybe it started as something else entirely, something less generous, a small persistent hope that maybe, if I did something undeniable enough, someone at that table would finally look at me the way they looked at Priya. I'm not proud of that hope, but I think it's honest, and I promised myself I would be honest, at least here, even if I wasn't always honest at that dinner table about how much the years of laughter had cost me. The silence after I set the folder down lasted longer than I expected. My mother's eyes moved from the folder to my face and back again, as though she were trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. "You bought the Hollis building?" my father said finally. His fork had stopped halfway to his mouth. "The one on 5th and Colby," I said. "Yes. Grandpa's old building." Something moved across my father's face that I hadn't seen in years. Not pride exactly, not yet. More like the particular disbelief of a man being handed something he'd stopped letting himself want. Priya recovered faster than either of them. She always did. "That's a lot of money, Ren," she said, her tone carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that takes real effort to maintain. "Where did that even come from?" "Work," I said simply. "The consulting. The properties I've been renovating. It adds up if you don't spend 15 years explaining yourself to people who've already decided not to listen." I hadn't meant for that last part to come out. It just did, quiet and even, no different in tone than if I'd been reading a grocery list. But I watched it land. I watched my mother's face shift, the practiced ease she carried through every family gathering faltering for just a second. "That's not fair," she said. "We've always—" "You laughed," I said. 10 minutes ago. When Priya said I was 35 and single like it was a punchline. You laughed before you even thought about it. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's a reflex. Reflexes tell you what's actually underneath when there isn't time to perform something else. I wasn't angry when I said it. That surprised me more than anything. I had expected, if this moment ever came, that it would come wrapped in fury I'd been storing for years. Instead it came out steady, almost gentle, the way you'd explain something to someone you still, despite everything, didn't want to hurt. My mother's mouth opened and closed. Priya's husband suddenly found his water glass extremely interesting. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel small," I said. "I spent 30 years feeling small in this house. I'm not interested in trading places. I'm telling you because I'm tired of being a woman you only notice when there's something to compare me against." Priya's jaw tightened. "So this whole thing, buying Dad's building, this was about proving something?" "Maybe at first," I admitted. "I won't pretend it wasn't somewhere underneath. But it stopped being about you two a long time ago. It became about whether I could build something real out of a life nobody else was paying attention to. Turns out I could. My father set his fork down entirely now. He looked at the folder like it might disappear if he touched it too quickly. "Can I see it?" he asked, voice rough in a way I hadn't heard before. I slid it toward him. My father opened the folder with the careful hands of a man handling something fragile. Inside were the deed, the closing documents, a set of photographs I'd taken of the building's restored brick facade, the original cornerstones still visible where I'd had the ivy cleared away. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked. "I used to bring you kids here," he said finally, not looking up. "Before it sold. Did you know that, Run? You were maybe 4. You used to run your hand along that brick wall like it was something alive." "I don't remember," I said honestly. "I do," he said. "I remember thinking someday if things ever turned around, I'd get it back for the family. And then things never turned around, and I stopped saying it out loud because it started to feel like a joke I was telling myself." My mother was quiet, watching him look through the pages, something working behind her eyes that I couldn't quite name yet. "I didn't buy it to save you the trouble of never getting there," I said carefully. "I bought it because I wanted something of my own that meant something. It just happened to also mean something to you. I didn't plan that part. It's just how it worked out." "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" my mother asked. Her voice had lost its dinner party polish. It sounded smaller now, uncertain in a way I wasn't used to hearing from her. "The properties. The consulting business doing well. Any of it?" I considered the question honestly because I owed her that much, even now. Because every time I tried to talk about my life at this table, it turned into a comparison, I said. You'd ask about Priya's promotion, and then, almost as an afterthought, you'd ask what I was up to, and whatever I said would get a polite nod before the conversation moved back to something that actually interested you. I got tired of handing you pieces of myself that you set down without really looking at. "That's not..." My mother started, then stopped herself. I watched her actually consider it, maybe for the first time. I didn't realize I was doing that. "I know," I said. "That's what made it worse, honestly. It would have been easier if you'd meant to." Priya had gone quiet, her whine untouched now, her earlier composure cracked at the edges. "I didn't mean anything by the joke, Run. It's just what we say. It's how we've always talked to each other." "I know that too," I said. "But that's how we've always talked isn't the same as that's how we should talk. You've had 15 years of easy laughs at my expense, and I've had 15 years of learning to smile through it because the alternative was making everyone uncomfortable. I'm done making that trade." The room held a silence that felt different from the one before, not shocked exactly, but rearranging itself, the way a house settles after a long overdue repair. I excused myself before dessert. I told them I needed air, which was true, though it wasn't the whole truth. I needed distance from the table, from the four faces trying to recalibrate around a version of me they hadn't made room for before. My father followed me out, which surprised me. He wasn't a man who chased conversations. He preferred to let them settle on their own schedule. We stood on the porch in the cooling evening air, the kind of blue dusk that makes everything look softer than it is. "I should have said something at the table," he said. "Years ago. Every time your mother or your sister..." "You don't have to apologize for them," I said. "You're not responsible for what they say." "No," he agreed. "But I'm responsible for what I let go unanswered. There's a difference between not causing the hurt and not stopping it when I could have." I didn't have a response ready for that. It was the most direct thing my father had said to me in years, maybe ever, and I found I didn't know what to do with the weight of it. "I used to think you didn't notice," I said quietly. "The way things were, with me and Priya." "I noticed," he said. "I just told myself it wasn't my place to referee between my daughters. I see now that wasn't fairness. That was cowardice wearing a nicer name." We stood there a while longer, not talking, just letting the porch light hum against the dark. It was the first time in years I felt like my father was actually standing beside me instead of somewhere just past me, looking at something else. "The building," he said eventually. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. Part of me thought about turning it into office space, leasing it out. Part of me thought about something else. "What's the something else?" A design studio, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came, like they'd been waiting for someone to finally ask. My own firm. I've been doing consulting work under other people's names for years. I think I'm ready to put mine on the door. My father nodded slowly, like he was turning the idea over and finding it solid. Your grandfather would have liked that, he said. He always said a building should hold something that matters to the person who owns it. Not just tenants. Something real. I think I'd like that too, I said. My mother found me in the kitchen an hour later, drying the last of the serving dishes. Priya had left with her husband not long after dessert, quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that meant she was still turning the evening over in her head rather than having decided what to make of it. I've been thinking about what you said, my mother told me, taking a dish towel from the drawer and standing beside me without quite looking at me, the way she often talked about hard things, sideways, over the safety of a task. Okay, I said, giving her room. I don't think I ever decided not to see you, she said slowly. I think it was easier to focus on the daughter, who made noise. Priya always needed an audience. You never did. I mistook that for not needing anything at all. I needed things, I said. I just learned early that asking didn't get me very far, so I stopped. My mother's hands stilled on the dish towel. That's an awful thing to hear a daughter say. It's not meant to punish you, I said. It's just true. I'm not asking you to feel terrible about it forever. I'm asking you to actually look at me now that I'm standing in front of you with something you can't shrink down into a punchline. I don't want to only see you when there's a building involved, she said, and for the first time that night, her voice cracked slightly, something real slipping through the careful composure she usually wore like a second skin. I want to understand how I let it get to 15 years. I set down the dish I was drying. I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think it happened slowly, the way most things people regret happen, not in one moment, but in 1,000 small ones where it was easier to laugh than to ask a real question. She nodded, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached over and, hesitantly, put her hand over mine on the counter. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of reconciliation you'd see staged for effect. It was small and uncertain and entirely real, which somehow made it matter more. I am proud of you, she said. I should have said it 100 times before tonight. I'm saying it now because I mean it, not because there's a folder on the table. I believe you, I said, and found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I actually did. 6 months later, I stood in the gutted first floor of the Hollis Street building, watching contractors strip old paneling from walls that had waited decades to breathe again. Sunlight came through the tall front windows in long gold columns, catching the dust in the air like something ceremonial. I had named the firm Voss and Stone, my name twice, once given and once chosen, a small private joke only I understood. Stone for the steadiness I'd had to build in myself when no one else offered to hold the weight. My father visited every few weeks, always quiet, always studying the brickwork with a kind of reverence that made the whole project feel less like a business decision and more like something being returned to where it belonged. My mother came too, eventually, tentatively at first, then more often. She never quite knew what to say about beams or load-bearing walls, but she started asking questions anyway, real ones, the kind that require you to actually be curious about the answer. Priya and I didn't fix everything overnight. Some habits don't dissolve in a single dinner, however honest. But she stopped making the jokes. And once, unprompted, she sent me an article about a female-owned engineering firm that had just broken ground on a downtown development, with a single line attached. Asterisk, thought of you. Proud of you, actually. Asterisk. It wasn't everything. But it was something real, and after so many years of only ever getting performance, something real felt like enough. I think, for a long time, I believed that being overlooked was simply the shape my life would always take, that some people are given rooms to fill and others are given corners to stand quietly in, and that the difference was fixed the moment your family decided who you were. I don't believe that anymore. What I learned, standing in that half-finished studio with sawdust settling on my shoulders like a strange kind of snow, is that the people who laugh at you across a dinner table are often just repeating a story they were told about you years ago, one they never bothered to update. You can spend your whole life resenting that story, Or you can quietly, patiently, build something too solid for the story to explain away. I didn't buy that building for revenge. Not really, not in the end. I bought it because I was tired of being small in rooms that had never once tried to make space for me. And somewhere in the middle of buying it, restoring it, standing in it, I stopped needing anyone's laughter to stop in order to feel like I mattered. That, I think, is the real ending. Not the folder on the table. Not my mother's hand over mine in the kitchen. Not even the studio, with its long gold light and my name, twice, painted on the door. The real ending is quieter than that. It's the morning I woke up at 35, alone in an apartment I'd chosen for myself, and realized I no longer flinched at the word single, because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing it to mean unfinished. I was never unfinished. I was only ever unseen. And now, finally, I am not.